Talk about program design mistakes. So everyone makes mistakes. The only people that aren't making mistakes are people who are not trying hard enough. That's my philosophy on mistakes. So what I'm talking about with program design mistakes here is primarily the things that you maybe do without realizing you're doing, not necessarily the intricacies of, hey, this guy should do that many reps, this guy should do this many reps. It's much more about these big governing ideas or concepts or governing trends in people's application of program design. So the first one is not being principle based. If you're designing programs and the first thing you think when you're designing a program is what exercise should I do, you haven't established a principle based approach. You need to look at what are the principles, the scientific principles of training. How do I implement them? What does that look like? And that's how you establish really good long-term program design. Neglecting to establish a principle-based methodology in place of a reactionary or sort of day-to-day, haphazard or sporadic kind of programming where it's I write something that feels good or I think is good and justify it somehow by saying, hey, this guy needs to do more power snatches, so I'm going to just do more power snatches. How does everything fit into the big picture? Where do all these things fit? The pieces should fall into place once the principles exist in your thinking. It's a cause and effect kind of process. Understand that the effect is what we're looking for. What are the causes that create that effect? And on the big picture, right? What makes you better at snatch and clean and jerk? Specificity, training the snatch and clean and jerk. What makes you stronger? Overload, having a program that progressively overloads the organism. The structure of the week, the structure of the month, these things need to take into account fatigue management, SRA, et cetera, et cetera. So have your principles laid out ahead of time and establish those as the foundation and the sort of base point to start from, and then build the program from there, always referencing back to the principles. The second is dogma, having too much faith in a given program or method. This is one that I have a personal attachment to a lot because dogma is almost always attached to a geographically labeled program, the Bulgarian program, the Chinese method, the Russian program. There's this idea that a quickly defining term like Bulgarian or Chinese can sum up the entirety of a system or the entirety of a program, and then sticking to that. And anything you do, when you're dogmatic, has to be related back to what was happening in the original Bible of training, so to speak. So, getting trapped in the idea of a program versus the results of a program is the problem. If you're stuck on the idea that the Bulgarian program is the best program, regardless of the fact that the 7 people you've done it with have all become injured and not gotten better, you're disregarding the results of the program. You're only looking at what your dogmatic viewpoint tells you. And then kind of what goes hand in hand with that is justification versus discovery. You're justifying why things happen in the program, not discovering what the program does. So, the Bulgarian example here would be, you've got a lifter, you're pushing them hard in the Bulgarian system, you're doing it, you're sticking to the literature, you're boom, 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 it's going great. They're getting worse, they're breaking, things are hurting, and you justify the results they're getting because you can't deny that the system is wrong. You can't say, hey, the system is wrong because you're dogmatic. So you say, well, it must be the athlete's broke down. The athlete's a bad athlete. The athlete could recover more. The athlete could do this more. It's every other problem outside of the actual program being wrong versus having a discovery mentality, which would be to say, we did the Bulgarian program. Here's the results we got. It appears that the Bulgarian system does this to people. It creates this outcome. When you have a discovery mentality, you're always looking at the results and the byproduct of what you're doing and using that as a metric to gauge whether the system is right or wrong. So, third one, kind of similar to the dogmatic approach, is the copycat programming. This is something that I think is just a byproduct of being somewhat lazy, and maybe not even lazy, but maybe somewhat inexperienced, is the grabbing another program that was written for somebody else and copying it in part or in whole and delivering it to your athlete or to yourself. So it goes, it's a little bit more small scale than like, jumping on a Chinese or Bulgarian program, which is more of a overarching methodology. This would be like taking Liu Xiaojun's programs or pieces of his program and applying it to yourself. Well, I saw Liu Xiaojun did 15 triples in the back squat at 240 kilos. I should be doing 15 triples. It's applying an individualized program for another person to you. Definitely not a good methodology. It often comes about from inexperienced people, like I said, where you maybe just need something to sink your teeth into at first when you're new to programming or new to coaching. You have to grab something. And it's easy to look at, hey, what the best do, we're doing that. It also is bad in that it's assuming what they're doing is best for you, which is definitely not the case. The things that good lifters do, to improve themselves are very individualized and very specific to them. Your program should look different than that, not necessarily in content, but in volume, in dosage, in those things. And just grabbing someone's program and applying it yourself makes no sense. The fourth would be like an over-reliance on indirect methods of improvement. This is a big one that for sure I fell into when I was coaching initially. When I was young, I think a lot of young coaches fall into this, is the over-reliance on indirect methods of improvement. And by indirect, I would mean things that are GPP in training, strength development to its excess, right? Hey, if we bring the squat up 50 kilos, you're going to snatch and clean and jerk 20 or 30 kilos more. You have to. If you could deadlift 700 pounds, you'd definitely be able to clean and jerk 400. That kind of thinking is incorrect, and it's the idea that you can use indirect methods to influence directly the result of your snatch and clean and jerk. And we just know that's not the case. There's an indirect influence, yes, but indirect influences always have a limit. If you front squat 100 kilos and you clean and jerk 100, sure, you increase your front squat by more, the potential to clean and jerk goes up. If you front squat, 270 kilos and you clean and jerk 160, spending any more time on front squatting is an absolute, waste of time and energy. The other indirect sort of methods of improvement, the other kind of aspect that fall into here are like technique development to its excess. The idea, and this is a great quote, the great idea is, or ism here is, perfection is the enemy of profit, right? The idea that your technique has to be immaculate and flawless in order for you to be better as a lifter. While that's a great standard to keep, that you're trying to be perfect, you have to at some point let the reins go a little bit to the point that you're able to maximize results when it's necessary. It's great to be striving for flawless technique, but every single lift that's won an Olympic gold medal, if you were to break them down, look at them side by side, I doubt you would look at every single one of them and say they're all the most technically flawless. They're all exceptional. They're all technically great, but are they the best technical lifts ever performed? Probably not. They probably fall somewhere in the middle range. Maybe even a lot of them are just not perfect or not great. They might even be kind of rugged. So understand that technique, while it's necessary, it is not sufficient to win. It's not sufficient to do your best. Doesn't mean we're not working towards it, but the idea that you can continually improve or you should only focus on technique till it's flawless is going to be another failure there. And then the sort of the third one here in the over-reliance issue, or the indirect methods issue here, is the exercise novelty. This is something where it's, exercise novelty has an impact on your training results. If you move from doing, if you're doing back squats only all the time and you switch to safety bar squats, you might have a quick boost in your ability. There's a new stimulus, it's novel, things feel great, you work better, it jumps up, right? There's a nice kind of hit you get from that. Chasing after that effect all the time over and over again is just chasing, it's like trying to catch smoke. You're never going to actually grab hold of it because it's not something that's really sufficient or tangible. You see this a lot where people jump from one program to another because the excitement, the newness, things jump up, things come up. You see this a lot in the idea of like cueing people excessively, finding the best cue, the best term, the best way to describe something. These are all great. They work well. They should be sporadically included in the program. They should be, part of the training, but they are not a direct influence on your results. The direct influence stuff, the snatch, clean and jerk variations, SPP work is going to be the thing that really improves, that drives the results. Excessive use of exercise novelty won't do that. Adding a new complex, creating an exercise that's special or significant, while it may make the day better, may make the person more happy or engaged for a couple of days or weeks, it's not the thing that drives results. Finally, I think the biggest failure, the biggest mistake would be not tracking any metrics, right? Not keeping track of volume, intensity, exercise selection, any of these factors is just a complete failure as a coach, because what you're doing is setting yourself up to have no clue what you've done in the past. If you don't know what you've done in the past, you cannot possibly manage what's going to happen in the future. If your lifter is performing 5,000 reps in a training cycle and you think that number is 2,000 and you're like, we can do more, you might be very sorely mistaken. The biggest thing here is that it's very difficult for people to look at large groups of numbers and quickly ascertain conclusions from that. You can't look at a program on paper and tell me the average intensity of that program just by looking at it. It's difficult. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of math involved. It's not necessarily complex, but it's tedious. And you have to keep track of these variables and keep track of this stuff, if for no other reason than having a record of what you've done so you can look back and draw conclusions. If you had an athlete performing really well for 6 months and then, things changed and fell apart, how do you know what actually changed? How do you know what's different if you weren't tracking it? So super important to do those. That is like the biggest failure, is to not actually track what you're putting down on paper, what you're doing. And then, summary of all this is really just like develop your grasp of the entire process as a coach. Grasp everything from principles in training, tracking metrics, understanding what's driving progress, understanding that there's differences between athletes, that the programs are different, and understanding that there is no one best way. Grasp the big picture that this stuff is you're a problem solver. You're not somebody who's just plugging in numbers and plugging these things together. Get an idea of what the whole process looks like. And then work from the big picture down towards individual training sessions when you're writing programs. Look at, where do I want this lifter to be in 5 years? What kind of lifter are they going to be? What do they need to accomplish in order for that to happen? How do I know that in 5 years my lifter is going to be lifting 15 kilos more in each lift? Well, I have to understand that there's a mathematical process to this, that there's got to be some degree of overload, some degree of, improvement, and I have to look at, how do I accomplish that? How do I, quantify the result, the training, to the point that I can say definitively, we're doing the training that's going to lead to these results. And start from the big picture. Start from where they need to be in 5 years and work your way back towards the actual day of the workout today. And then the big one is, look for solutions, not justifications, right? Look at what your problems are, discover what the problems are, discover what's happening, and then look for solutions to those. Don't just look for justification for what you're doing. It's very easy to build a program and say, we do this, this, and this, and that's why it works. That's just justifying. That's not really, discovering what's happening. You can say, hey, here's the results I get from this program. When we do power cleans all the time, the power clean goes up. Okay, we know that's true. We can do a shitload of squats, and then your snatch and clean and jerk go up. You can say, well, see, squatting hard is really good. Well, Did you actually discover that, or is that just that you connected squatting to those lifts because at the same time you're doing them? Maybe you were also doing a lot more snatch and clean and jerk there too. So understand that you should never be trying to prove your program right. You should basically be trying to prove your program wrong all the time. Discover why it's failing. Discover why it's not doing the best that it can do. All right.